Okay, with that out of the way, let's walk through the actual workspaces in Procreate and then Photoshop, and I'll also show you some of the custom setups that I have to speed up my workflow. Let's get started with Procreate. I personally find that the best way to learn is get a quick overview of the different tools and then just get started drawing and painting, and you'll master the tools as they come up. There are some tools I'll never touch, but it's good to know they're there, so if I ever want to learn it, it's just a Google search and a tutorial video away. So let's jump into Procreate. I have the app right here, and when you open yours for the first time, you'll see a few example digital paintings for you to take a look at. You won't see exactly what I show here because obviously these are all of my paintings that I've developed over the course of using the program. In terms of the setup, when you want to start a new one, you'll be going to here and setting up the canvas. And I tend to use screen size the most often as just the default, and I find it very easy, but of course you can always create your own custom size if you would like. For this class, I recommend using the screen size because that's how I've sized the class example. So let's jump into that and I can show you how the actual workspace is set up. So what's great about Procreate is that it seems very simple and it's very intuitive for someone to just start, jump in, turn on the brush tool, select a color, and start painting. So that's really great, and for beginners, I find that people get the hang of it or the idea of it really easily. At the same time, within these few icons is actually a lot of power and capability. So as you start growing your skills in digital painting, this program can totally grow with you. And you can see just by the samples that they provide with the app that you can create some really amazing pieces with just this app itself. So let's start talking a little bit about how all the tools are laid out. The gallery will take you back to that home page that you just saw, and here I would say is more like settings and adjustments, basic tools, and then these sliders will increase and decrease brush size, increase and decrease brush opacity. There's a shortcut button right here, which I'll explain in a bit, and then undo and redo. So let's start with what you're probably most interested in, which is the brush tool. Procreate comes with a lot of great brush tools by default, and every single brush that I'm going to be using in this class example comes with the app. So you don't need to worry about downloading anything special or creating any brushes. Just go with what's already in there. Of course, as you become more advanced, you'll probably be very curious about what other brushes there are. I had a lot of fun experimenting with different brushes, but at the end of the day, I think paring it down to 5 brushes that you really love using is ideal because it'll streamline your process and also kind of develop a consistent look and feel across all of your drawings. So the ones that I tend to use the most are the technical pen, and that is for clean line work, and you can find that under inking, technical pen. The shale brush, which you can find under calligraphy right here, and I love that for a really textured, dry brush feeling, and I probably use it the most in my painting these days. The dry ink is something that I like to use when I need something that is kind of in between the two, so it has a thinner line and it's great for lining, but it has a rough edge, so it gives a little bit of texture. And then the round brush I use when I need a certain type of more watercolor or transparent type of feeling, and I use it a lot in backgrounds, and you can find that under the painting category. And finally, the HB pencil, which you can find under sketching, is the one I tend to use the most when I'm just sketching and just thinking about ideas. I put the ones I use most in this category up here, and if you want to create your own, all you have to do is pull down and you'll find this plus sign and create a new grouping and just move the brushes that you like the most into there. What I like to do is actually create a duplicate version. So you can just slide left on any brush, duplicate it, and then drag it into your new category so that you don't need to worry about messing any of the original default brushes up. And that is how my brushes are set up. In case you're curious on how each looks, feel free to go ahead and take some time right now to play with those, but I can show you really quick. So that's the technical pen, and depending on how hard I press, it can be very thin or much thicker. And that's what's great about using the Apple Pencil with the iPad Pro. It can tell how hard you're pressing, and it will feel really like drawing on real paper. So if you use a very light touch on paper, you'd have a thin line. If you pressed harder, you would have a thicker line. And then the shale brush is the one I mentioned earlier. So if I have a small brush and press really lightly, it has that kind of thin textured line, which is great for detailing. And at the biggest size and pressing hard, it creates these really great, gorgeous brush strokes. Next is dry ink. And again, I can create these very thin lines and then also thicker lines like that. So you can see it's kind of in between these two. It's more of a pen, but it has a rough edge, which I really like. The round brush looks like this. Small, thin, painterly lines, which I really like. And this is probably one of the best brushes in terms of having opacity because it really feels like a watercolor brush. So if I paint very lightly, it has this great look. And it layers on top of each other. So if you kind of like this watercolor effect, I highly recommend this brush. And then obviously the harder you press, the more opaque it becomes. Finally, the HB pencil. You can create very realistic looking pencil lines. And it gets really small too. So if you want to create more like small detailed pencil work, you can see that it would be very suitable for that as well. So those are the 5 main brushes that I use and will be using in this class. Next is the smudge tool. So the smudge tool is exactly what it sounds like. And again, you can use any of the brushes that it comes with for all of these tools. So just to show you what the smudge tool looks like, I'll do a quick demo here. So say I have this color and then I put this lighter color next to it. I almost never use the smudge tool, but I want to show you what it's good for. People who like to blend their colors, say have more oil painting or like traditional painting look, will find this to be very useful. So you can create these really smooth blending transitions, which is definitely a type of look. And then the eraser tool is of course what it sounds like, but it's very powerful. The way that I digitally paint is actually using the paintbrush and the eraser tool just as much. So I pretty much paint with the eraser. So say this is a blob that I have and I wanted to turn it into a star. One way that I could do that is to create like these more like blobs and like shapes and make sure I like the overall composition. And when I want to clean it up, I basically use the same brush. And one shortcut to do that is, say I have the shale brush on, just hold on to it and then you'll start erasing with the current active brush. The way I have it set up is that when I hold onto this shortcut button and use the pen tool, it will start erasing. And it creates an edge just like as if I had painted with it, and I find that to be really helpful. So it's almost like sculpting when you're painting, just taking away the parts that you don't want. But I find that the kind of back and forth of like painting and then erasing helps me get to a more organic result rather than just going straight into it. So that is the eraser tool. And here are the layers. So I remember when I started digital painting, one of the coolest aspects of, or features of digital painting was that there are layers, something that I take for granted. It seems very normal now. But the best thing about layers is that you're able to adjust and modify and fix or enhance things on specific areas without affecting anything else on a different layer. So if that sounds confusing to you, let me just do a really quick example of what that means. So traditionally, say I was creating a painting and I was just doing everything on one layer, just like, drawing on paper in real life, and it looks something like this. So it looks great, kind of happy with it, but I wish that I hadn't made this navy blue part there. I just want to move it a little bit. Traditionally, you would probably have to either start over, or I could try to like fix it manually, like try to erase the top here, draw this part in, and then fix it like this, but then it starts affecting the other parts and it can get messy, and sometimes there is no real undo. And of course, if I wanted to say erase something, it would affect all 3. Having layers, on the other hand, allows you to really plan ahead and be able to fix things or change things without destroying anything on the other layer. So now say it's a very similar painting and it looks the same to the eye, but because they're on different layers, I can actually just get rid of this blue layer if I decide, I don't really want that part. Or if I want to move it, I can just move each piece individually. And that's very, very handy. I would say that as I was learning how to digitally paint, I always wanted to get to a point where I could do everything on one layer, because for whatever reason, I thought that that meant that I really knew how to digitally paint. Now that I've kind of gone back and forth, or like kind of reached where I wanted to be when I thought that, I find that I still really like working in layers, but just in a more thought out way. Of course, just painting and being able to work in a very seamless manner is really nice. Like, I don't want to like keep going on to different layers if I already know what I'm going to do. There is that aspect of keeping everything on one layer. But on the other hand, say I wanted to animate a part or just use it in different contexts, of course it's going to be way more helpful to keep certain parts on separate layers versus recreating it every time. So don't worry about using it as whether it's a handicap or a learning tool for now. Use layers to your advantage. I think that they are one of the best aspects of digital painting. The undo and redo is available here, but I tend to use the double tap for undo and the triple tap for redo way more often. It just speeds up my workflow, and I hardly ever use these buttons down here. This is what I will call the shortcut key. This has a lot of different functions and you can set it up to be custom to your workflow, and I use it all the time. So when I tap it, it brings up the eyedropper so I can get any color from the palette, and that's the active color now. When I touch it and use the pen tool, that's when the eraser tool comes up. So that's a good segue actually into the settings. Under the wrench tool is a bunch of different actions. So everything is pretty self-explanatory, and I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds. If you have a question that I don't cover, Procreate's user guide is actually super thorough and really great. But really quickly, here is the image, and you can insert a file or insert a photo into your canvas, and of course take a photo, but I've never ever used that function. Cut, copy canvas, paste is very self-explanatory, but I use the 3-finger pull down to bring up the quick menu way more often. I don't think I've actually ever gone up here to select that. And then canvas, you can turn on a drawing guide, which is helpful. Now I'll just show you really quick what that means. You can turn on like a 2D grid if that helps you. There's an isometric view, and then you can set up a vanishing point, which is really awesome if you draw it in a perspective. And then symmetry, which is basically if you draw on this side, it mirrors it on the other side automatically, and people do some really great symmetrical art. You can set up your drawing grid however you want, and then turn it on and off here. I do use flip canvas horizontally a lot more often because I find that really helps you make sure that your composition is balanced. So a lot of times I'll draw things a lot more like right leaning for whatever reason, and when I flip it horizontally I can fix it, and it's really helped me kind of grow in my drawing skills because the more I do it, the more I automatically know how to correct, and I don't have to use this as much to check. Sharing is how you can export from the file itself. So you can export as a Procreate file, PSD, which is awesome because then you can directly send it to Adobe Photoshop, which is what I do often, a PDF, a JPEG, a PNG, and a TIFF. And if you don't know what some of these terms are, don't worry about it for now. I'll have a separate export section where I go over the common file formats that I tend to use the most. Another really great feature about Procreate is that it automatically has this time-lapse recording. So as you're drawing, it records all of your brush strokes and you can replay it. And I'm sure you've seen it on Instagram or on websites, just these really quick replays of the whole process. And you can export it, you can have a live broadcast, and you can always turn it off if you decide you don't want it for whatever reason. But I actually have the smallest capacity iPad Pro, and I've never had an issue with storage, which is, I don't know how they do it, but that's really amazing. So I recommend keeping it on because you never know when you're gonna want to watch it. Finally, in preferences, there's some very self-explanatory things. You can have a light interface, and that's totally based on your preference. I tend to work in the dark interface. For left-handed users, you might want to move this to the left side so that you're drawing with your right hand and can quickly adjust it here. The brush cursor I like to keep turned on. It just means when I'm drawing it has like kind of that preview stamp looking thing instead of, let me show you what it looks like without it. So now I don't have that preview icon, like that little circle. So now you can see there's like this outline by having the brush cursor turned on. And then you can AirPlay the canvas, which is displays on a second monitor. And I've never adjusted any of these default settings, but you can obviously suit it to how you want it to be. Third-party stylus, if for whatever reason you're not using Apple Pencil. If you are using Apple Pencil, it'll automatically connect, so you don't need to worry about that. And then edit pressure curve. I think that's too advanced for a beginner, but basically you can go into those settings and adjust how the iPad reacts to how hard you're pressing the screen. Gesture controls, on the other hand, I do think is super important to think about because it can really speed up your workflow as you get more into digital painting. So a lot of the tools that I've just described are accessible through different gestures. and you can customize it so that the ones you end up using the most are the easiest to access. So for example, I use erase all the time, and I have it set up so when I, for whatever reason, want to erase with my finger, I can do it that way. And I also have it so that using the shortcut key plus the Apple Pencil erases as well. On the other hand, if I use the smudge tool all the time, I probably would want to have that be the touch function, or the shortcut key with Apple Pencil. Instead, I have it set up with a shortcut that I don't use very often, just in case I want to use it, but to be honest, I'd probably at that point would just go up to the smudge tool. Assisted drawing, if you want to turn that on, you can set up your own shortcuts. I don't really use that very often, so I don't have it set up that way. The eyedropper tool, as I've mentioned, helps select any color from your canvas, and since I use that all the time, I have it set up so that it's super easy to access. Quick menu is actually something that should be really helpful in theory, but I find that I very rarely use it, probably because it takes me out of my workflow. So I have it set up so that the 4-finger tap will bring it up, and let me just show you really quick what that looks like. So I can tap with 4 fingers, and basically 6 tools will pop up, and I can really now just hit that and go to shale brush, which is cool. I tap it again, say I want to go to selection tool, and I can do that, tap it again, and now go to transform tool. So I could see that really being helpful to some people. For me, for whatever reason, I find it just as easy to just tap these buttons, and I'm still thinking through maybe better ways to use it, but it's just another feature that's there. It's like, maybe flip horizontally could be a cool function. I would say put things that are harder to access, like maybe something that's buried in here that you tend to use a lot, and use it and put it into your shortcuts. To edit it, all you have to do is bring it up and then hold onto it, and you can set the action. And basically almost all the actions are available for you to customize. Full screen is great for people who don't like to work with the UI on. I use the tools all the time, so I tend to just leave it on there. But if you want to just have it be an empty canvas, this is the place that you can quickly access it. Clear layer is what it sounds like. You clear out the layer, so I have it set to something that will be hard to trigger by accident. So I have it set up to be a scrub, and I'm on this layer, and say I'm like painting, and I don't really like it for whatever reason, I want to start all over. I just scrub back and forth with 3 fingers. Copy and paste is what it sounds like. I have it turned on so the 3-finger swipe down will bring it up. I find it much handier than trying to go up there and turning it on. But again, you could even set it up in your quick menu if you prefer that. And finally, layer select. Touch hold will invoke the layer select. Say I have a few different layers going on, and I'm painting on this blue layer now, and I want to go back to the pink layer really quick. I just hold on to that area, and then I can quickly switch to the pink layer. So now I'm on there. And finally, there's a general section. I always have this turned on, rotate with pinch zoom. I use it all the time. I think it's the default setting, and then I don't have this obviously because I use touch actions all the time. So don't worry about it too much for now. You're welcome to set it up the way that I have, just so that you can follow along exactly like what I do. Or of course, if you find that there's certain actions you tend to go to more often, customize it for you. The whole purpose of this gesture control panel is to take advantage of the touch and pencil functions of an iPad and really streamline your process.